Yeah, no, I was expecting less people. You ruined it. Awesome. So this is Universal Rendering React Apps. If that's not what you came to see, you can exit now. It's cool. Damn. All right. So yeah, Universal Rendering React Apps. Yep, still a thing. And yeah, it's frustrating as hell. Yes. That's my perma face while working on it. So, welcome to the talk. I'm Matt Webb. I'm the lead front end over at Blinker. Show of hands, anyone know Blinker? Yeah. So for those who don't know who Blinker is, it's an app for buying and selling used cars and also refinancing your car. So if you're in the car market or know people that own a car or whatever, just buy a car, you should use our app. I'm the organizer and founder of Denver Script Meetup. Does anyone know Denver Script Meetup? If the rest of you don't, come to it, it's fun. We have beer and pizza. Also, I'm a co-organizer here at Develop Denver. Proud dad of 3 fur babies, which apparently fur babies sounds weird to some people I know here. And on the side, I'm a woodworking wannabe. Twitter and GitHub, if you guys want to hit me up for anything, feel free. I'm also in the Dev Slack channel, just Matt Webb. I think I was in early enough that wasn't taken. So what is universal rendering? Does anyone here know what universal rendering is? Show of hands. All right, so most of you all look like I might know what I'm talking about. Great. So universal rendering, or you may have also heard of it called isomorphic, or also server-side rendering, or also SSR. Pick one, they're all the same. Universal rendering seems to be the normalized one, or SSR. So you can pick one, it's all good. So cool, what is it? So JavaScript apps rendering on the client side, that's usually how JavaScript works, right? So when users are coming to a JavaScript application, they're usually just given a very basic, very minimal HTML page of nothing. So when the browser hits, we get JavaScript, and now your application loads. So what this will allow you to do is it'll allow you to fully render a JavaScript application on the server, so it'll come right up to the web page pre-populated. So yeah, what are the benefits of doing that? So search engine optimization, if search crawlers are coming to your website and it's fully JavaScript enabled, Google does a pretty good job, but they're still not that great at doing it. Performance, you get some nice performance gains out of it. User experience, and more edge case, but JavaScript being disabled. So, SEO. So, universal rendering will help with search engine optimization. Like I said before, Google does it better than everyone else, where they're actually able to render a JavaScript application. The only thing that they're not really good at is like if you have to go fetch data. So when you have to go pre-populate your page with JavaScript plus fetching data, Google still doesn't know what to do. So this is what most search engines see without universal rendering. This is what Google might see without universal rendering. if the HTML page just had like static HTML, CSS for the header and footer or sidebar, it can render that because it's just static, but as you can see, there's nothing on that page. But if you have universal rendering, we have to go fetch a list of, say, cars. You're going to have a fully rendered page. So all search bots will see it like this, and they'll be happy. Just another example, Google, this is what they would see, like we have a car detail page that tells you the details about a vehicle. But with universal rendering, they'll actually get the images and all the content. So when they're going through and indexing your website, they can actually have real content. Performance. Universal rendering will usually help performance of your app, but not always. It's kind of it's got some edge cases where all browsers, when they're downloading your HTML and CSS, normally when you're downloading a blank HTML page, it's super small. There's nothing in it. But now if you're doing like a pre-rendered list, so say you had 500 items you were going to render out on a page, your HTML size now got much larger. It's still pretty negligible, so most people don't really notice that kind of like performance issue, but one of the nice things is like when people come to your webpage, it should be right there. It may not be interactive when it first loads, but it'll be right there. User experience, kind of the same thing what I was just saying before. When users come to your page, first time paint. So the first thing that users see on your page is a white HTML page. You see nothing. So if you're already sending them a pre-rendered application, they're going to see that. Even though if it's not interactive yet, like the browser hasn't taken over, they'll at least be able to start seeing it. And the next thing is JavaScript being disabled. Now it's going to depend on your user. It's pretty much like you're always going to have someone that has JavaScript enabled, but say if they didn't, they should be able to still click around to your page. So like on blinker.com, you can pull up like an entire list of cars. Filters may not be enabled because if JavaScript was disabled, we can't make new requests, but they can still click a different car and go and see that car. So it's fascinating. I can see it on all of your faces right now. But there's a catch. There's always a catch. Sometimes, even though performance can be a thing, performance can actually get hit. And also, this is probably the worst thing about it, is the complexity. Complexity becomes a big problem. So, it can degrade your performance. So, it's actually pretty negligible when people think about it. It's like just HTML. HTML doesn't really weigh that much in terms of file size. But also, when people are coming back to your page, say they're frequently coming back, usually all that stuff's already cached, so you don't have to worry too much about it. So there's like some performance hits that can happen. But it's really nothing. So even though this is really I should put can degrade like in quotes because it's pretty much never going to really be a problem. So really, we can't really say it'll ever be a performance enhancement. We can't really say it's a performance decrease. So it's kind of up in the air for performance. The thing that actually gets to you is app complexity. So who has made React apps before? Okay, so making it with having routes and doing calls to the server, populate data, it's all pretty easy, right? But now your app's about to get a little bit more complex because now you have to support nodes. So that means you have to have a node server to serve this up. You now have to have two routes. You have to have a static router and a browser router. So one that the server side can handle and the other one that your browser can handle. Prefetching data from an API, like I was saying before, like we have a list of cars, so it's an inventory of cars. So we have to go prefetch that data and then we have to render it out. Specific static markup rendering. So you have your like normal render function in React. Whereas in this case, you have to use render to static, or I'm kind of forgetting what that exact function name is. But also now you have to get more build tools involved. Usually people are using Webpack these days, but now you have to have a new Webpack configuration just for server-side. Server hot reloading. So if anyone here uses Redux, has anyone here been using Redux? That's some. So for those that don't know, it's a state management tool, pretty popular in the React community. So the next problem that you're going to have is you have to now hot reload that data. So when you're doing your development work, you don't have to keep like killing your server and restarting it. And then next is Redux store hydration. You are now serving a React app that you have to pre-render. So you have to actually hydrate the store with all the data that you're coming up with from the prefetch. So, bonus points. Render to string, not render to static. The render to string function in React is actually really slow. It's getting better, and actually in React 16, they're supposed to be making huge improvements to server-side rendering coming up. I haven't played around with that at all, so I can't really speak to how much faster it's going to be. But then there's other ways to solve it, and one of the more popular ones people are using today is it's called rapscaling. Rapscaling is from a JavaScript development firm called Formidable Labs. So they developed this because they wanted their stuff to work a lot faster. So what does that get you? Rendering is asynchronous, it's non-blocking. Render time is usually about anywhere between 50 and 85% faster, which I know sounds like a huge range, but it really depends on the size of your app. So you can do also node streaming. So it can actually be streaming your different components and updating them simultaneously instead of trying to set everything as one block. I just realized I'm walking away from the mic. Is everyone able to hear me in the back? Good, that's good. It also has a component caching layer. So once components have been served up, and unless they've actually changed, then it won't actually try and re-update it. So you'll get a nice performance boost out of that. Now, this is where actually the talk will start to make somewhat of sense. Sorry, I'm actually going to switch my configure to not mirror now, or to mirror. Sorry, exiting out full screen is apparently hard. There we go. So, actually, let me also pull up the source code so people can see this.
Can you zoom in a little bit?
Sure. So, because I was actually really busy, and thankfully, Colin Jett, everyone who works at Blinker, say hi, Colin. Colin. So he likes to do side projects. So he actually made a React server-side rendering boilerplate, which is really awesome because then I didn't have to make it. So I stole his. So just to give you an understanding of what this looks like, I'm going to disable JavaScript. And then when we refetch this, so this is a list of cars coming from Blinker's API. And all that is still being fetched from our API, rendered on the page, and this is with JavaScript disabled. Now it's not pretty, as you can see, there's no styles. It's because we're in development mode. If you were to serve like in Webpack, you can, for production, instead of it importing your styles dynamically, it will generate a CSS files for your web page. So server-side rendering, if we had done that for development mode, it would actually see like fully styled. And we can actually go to should be this next thing. So this is also with JavaScript disabled. It still renders out the page. Our internet is pretty slow, so images are not looking like they're working right now. Or server side's just broken on our website, which also would be funny. But as you can see, you can actually see a fully served up web page. And if you go to another page, even though, I mean, it gets really pretty as you can see. Because JavaScript's not enabled, it doesn't take over, so like our carousel isn't there, but you can still see all the images on that page. And then you can still have all the content that comes in, and Google can index all that, as well as Bing, Yahoo, and Baidu if anyone uses any of those. Especially Baidu. Does anyone use Baidu? You don't use a Chinese search engine? Weird. So, the other thing with this too is when your page is actually served up on server side, with React, it generates keys, so it has that virtual DOM, right? So when you do server-side rendering and the browser initiates, React goes, hey, I got all this stuff. And it'll render it, or it doesn't have to re-render. It'll just take over and just give you all the JavaScript functionality because it knows. Hi. Lost my voice. What's that?
React has keys.
Yes, React has keys. And it uses those keys to figure out where you are in the virtual DOM. So it sees the virtual DOM, matches up those keys, and it's like, cool, I can just take over and not have to worry about this. And actually, I'll go back to cars because it just has a little bit more. And for some reason, I don't know, my Chrome does that randomly where it pulls up DevTools in a new window. So again, having this with JavaScript disabled, you can see the filters on the left side, they don't work because JavaScript hasn't been able to take over. But with JavaScript enabled, so now the filters are enabled. So you see, it didn't have to re-render everything. It just came up, the keys matched in React, and it's like, cool, I know what to do. I'm just going to take over now, and I'm going to give you all the events and all the other functionality that you need. So one of the problems you have to now face is the communication from when you went from server-side rendering with an API fetch and coming back to going to another page. Because what happens is you come into an entry page, so say you came into home, and it's server-side rendered everything, including this list of everything, list of cars. So with that list of cars, now we have JavaScript enabled. So now that the server side is in there, we have to do a fetch to go get that data. But we do all that on the server when we come into an entry point. When you go to about, it doesn't server side render any of that. It's only on the actual entry point it does the server side rendering. So if we refresh this, that was the server side render and React took over. by going over to home, you can now see it says it's loaded. And now it had to load the script. So that was the browser going like, okay, we have this, we have to go fetch it now, we're loading. So it didn't do it on the server fed. Hopefully that was clear. So let's look at some code. Hopefully that's. Can everyone see that? Good. So, to try and kind of walk through this, if you know without server-side rendering, you just have an HTML page. You just have index.html with your bundle included, and boom, you have a React app. Easy. Of course, now with universal rendering, things get a little bit more complex. Now we have to have an Express, well, you don't have to use Express, but that's what we use for this. But you have to have a node server that now serves up their application. And also, right here, this is the Webpack configuration that you start to use to do hot reloading, so you're not constantly killing your server and having to restart it. And then there's one more for the hot module, Webpack's hot module replacement, reloader, it's one of those. And then we serve up our React server-side app. So the React server-side app instead of having your HTML document, and just it going, you have to actually kind of construct your HTML document. So you have to write the doc type, and then these, the provider, that's from Redux, and then the static router, that is from React Router, and that's what they use to be able to give you routing on universal rendering. And then it renders your app. And this is just your basic Redux store configuration. And then you also have to have something that fetches your data. So when you have React on the server, you don't get access to life cycles. So component did mal should update any of that. You don't get that in universal rendering. So we have to have something that goes to fetch your data once it's about to be rendered. So Telum has made this little app here that is able to go fetch data. So we're right here where it says line 6. We're telling it what path and what route it is, and we're saying like this route needs to go fetch data. And the way we end up getting that is we have that route, so it knows when it hits that route, it's going to be looking for something called fetch data, and that's what we're using to go dispatch off and go fetch the data so it can re-render, or so it can actually server-side render the content it got back from our API. And then our index.js, this is, did I not say this was about to get more complicated than just your regular React? So this is where we actually have the browser-side rendering for it. This is the index.js, so this is where we have where it actually says browser router. Browser router comes in from React Router 4, and well, the name of the component kind of explains it. It's for your routes from browser. That's not really important. It's just kind of like our HTML template, which I guess it is kind of important to note when you're doing universal rendering, especially for SEO, to get meta tags in there. You need to use something that will actually generate them, especially when you're switching between different routes. The kind of standard to use is React Helmet, which we forgot. Normally there'd be something in here that says React Helmet. Sorry about that. Then here, we need to do the initial state. So this is how we do the Redux hydration, where that looks a little funky, where you have to put it on a global window object. But this is where we would do the initial state rendering, or sorry, initial state hydration. I'm going to close some of those. So that's everything you had to do just to be able to have a universal rendering app. One of the things that becomes a little bit more, I guess, kind of disgusting is when you have to have this static fetch data. So we're inside the home component, and that fetch data, that's what I was talking about earlier. When they go and when our server is looking for that, it's trying to go, hey, okay, we're on the home page, that home. It's looking for this specific fetch data, and this is where we're just faking a session, and then here we're using Axios to go fetch from the Blinker API, and that's what we're returning down here into our Redux store. So what I was talking about before about having the browser being able to fetch the data when it was saying loading versus just displaying the data, you have to do this same function on component did now. The reason for that is like if you came on your entry point, say on the about page, that about page didn't have to go fetch any data. It had to now go, when you click the home button, you're not using universal rendering, so you're going to that in the browser, and the browser doesn't have access to this fetch data, but it does have access to the component did now because the browser has the React life cycles. And don't judge my code, I was just copy and pasting this before. So it's all the same things. So one thing that I wasn't able to do for this talk, so when you're doing universal rendering, because you have Node with you, you have direct access to your Node environment variables. So when server-side rendering hits and you have your environment set up for your environment variables, it can see this, it can read it, and it will work just fine. But because you're on the browser, we had to actually hard code that for the, because on the browser we do not have access to that. There is a way around that. Just like we had on too many things in an index. That's it. So you could do like the same thing that we were doing here where we're stringifying our initial state. So you can set globally the dip, like you can have your different environment variables. So these environment variables, you could do the same thing. So you do that same thing here and all this like API and still be able to so then you could actually do that where you then could have access to your environment variables without having to hard code it for the browser. So the render function for the home.js file, this is what we're setting up for the browser. Because if we're on server-side rendering, it's already gone and fetched that data, and it's already done this mapping, so it already has pre-populated everything for us. But when we hit the browser side, it's trying to render this React component without any data. So we have to do like this data check to see if have we hydrated the state of cars, and if not, we're just going to show loading right until it's like, cool, we got the cars now that we can actually render it. So, yeah, welcome to hell. So, like I said before, you get a performance boost, it's great for your SEO. I do not recommend doing this for just your day-to-day, messing around with React. No sense in actually doing this. And also there's no sense for you to actually create your own boilerplate. You can literally just go and Google for like 600 different boilerplates. And actually, Collins, you can use this one. So definitely, it's not made for every JavaScript. You don't have to do this for everything, but if it is something that you're worried about SEO, you're worried about performance, definitely this is something you want to use. It is a heartbreak, but luckily you can contact me, I can be your support group and cry with you. But yeah, that's it. Thank you.
What are you doing with, sorry if I missed it, what are you doing for like Windows, also Windows, or global calls?
So,
How do you handle global on serverless sites, so for Windows?
yeah, so that's another thing so on server-side rendering, you do not have the window object. So if you have different APIs that you're using that actually require the window object, you have to do this sweet looking thing that you're doing if statement checks of like if document type of undefined or something like that, and then you have to wrap that in an if statement. You can, usually if you can keep things kind of scoped to that static fetch data that's for the browser and then everything in component did mount or outside execution, like somewhere in that life cycle, if you can keep it separate in those areas, that's usually your best bet.
Do you have any sort of user data? Do you have to deal with how the server might render something differently than what you want to display in the client either?
Sorry, I guess I don't really understand.
So say I have a user that might be logged in that might have personalized data for that user. I can't necessarily look down the server because I might not know who the user is, or if any of that needs to be cached.
Okay, so if we have user data and you're trying
Any sort of personalized data, any data that would be different on the client that might be on the server.
well, because you're doing that on a fetch, right? You're going and making an XHR request. So that's exactly what we're doing with Axios, right? So even on the server, if you're making that request, like these cars, we don't have that stored anywhere. So it's all fetching and pulling it back in.
Okay.
So even if it was still like you had to go do an API call or something to the database or something like that to get that data back, it should be the same thing. You should be able to put it in that static fetch data and it will be able to render everything for you.
Cool.
So, different implementations, but so, like in you guys' example, do you have server-side rendering for everything on the site or just for certain routes and pages of components?
The current implementation for Blinker.com is all the things, but right now Blinker.com doesn't do a whole lot. Like it's just for finding cars and it's just for looking at cars. And right now we're working on, our team's actually starting to build feature parity. So everything you can do in the app, we eventually want to do in the website. And those are some hurdles we're going to have to come over. But like in this implementation here, where in the heck was that? Nope. Maybe. This is the problem when you get complicated. You have way more files and it's trying to remember where everything is. Hey, Colin. Which file was that? Where the routes are for the match.
Server or client? This isn't scripted.
And yeah, once again, this is why this stuff gets super complicated, super fast. Wait, is this it?
Yeah.
Yeah, so doing this implementation, we have the power to actually say like, okay, you only have to worry about fetching data on the universal rendering for these specific routes.
Okay.
So then if we get to like say user accounts and stuff like that, or login and registration, we don't really care about, universal rendering any of that stuff because for us, universal rendering is more like a nice performance boost and mainly for SEO.
And the login isn't going to work on with JavaScript disabled anyways.
It'll look pretty, but it won't function.
Cool. Okay, thanks.
Anyone else?
you.